the human heart. But Sarah Martinez never imagined that a life insurance policy worth $1.7 million would expose secrets that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage. It started on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sarah was sorting through the mail while her coffee grew cold on the kitchen counter, the familiar routine of suburban life playing out around her. Bills, advertisements, bank statements. Nothing unusual until her fingers stopped on an envelope marked with the logo of Metropolitan Life Insurance. Her husband Michael had mentioned getting additional coverage, something about protecting their future now that their daughter Emma was starting college. What he hadn't mentioned was the size of the policy or the fact that Sarah wasn't listed anywhere on the documents. As she tore open the envelope, expecting to find routine paperwork confirming their joint policy, her world began to tilt. The beneficiary section stared back at her with a name she didn't recognize, Elena Vasquez. Not Sarah Martinez, not their daughter Emma, but a complete stranger who was apparently worth more to Michael dead than his own family was alive. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the document again, hoping she had misunderstood something crucial. The policy was clear. $1.7 million would go directly to this Elena person upon Michael's death. No conditions, no shared benefits, no mention of his wife of 22 years or their daughter. The coffee mug slipped from her other hand, shattering against the tile floor and sending ceramic fragments across the kitchen like the pieces of trust that were crumbling inside her chest. 22 years of marriage, and she thought she knew Michael completely. They had met in college, married young, built a life together in their modest suburban home. He worked as a financial advisor, she taught elementary school, and they had always been honest about money, about everything. At least, that's what she had believed until this moment. Now, staring at this policy, she realized that honesty might have been the first casualty in whatever game Michael had been playing. The logical part of her mind tried to find innocent explanations. Perhaps Elena was a business partner, a client, someone Michael was helping in a professional capacity. But the emotional part of her, the part that had noticed how late he'd been working lately, how distant he'd become during dinner conversations, how he guarded his phone like a state secret, knew better. $1.7 million wasn't a business transaction. It was a declaration of love, a promise of security, a commitment to a future that apparently didn't include his legal wife. Sarah spent the rest of that morning pacing through their house, seeing it with new eyes. The family photos lining the hallway suddenly felt like props in an elaborate performance. The wedding picture on the mantel, where Michael's smile looked so genuine and full of promise, now seemed like evidence of a lie that had been 22 years in the making. Every room held memories that were now tainted with questions she was afraid to ask, and answers she was terrified to hear. By afternoon, she had made a decision that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. She was going to find Elena Vasquez and discover exactly who this woman was and what she meant to Michael. The internet made it easier than she had expected. Elena Vasquez, 34 years old, worked as a marketing coordinator at a downtown firm. Her social media profiles painted the picture of a vibrant, attractive woman who seemed to live a life filled with art gallery openings, weekend trips to wine country, and dinner parties with friends who looked like they belonged in fashion magazines. What struck Sarah most was how different Elena's world appeared from her own. While Sarah's Instagram was filled with classroom decorations, family barbecues, and pictures of Emma's soccer games, Elena's feed showcased a sophisticated urban lifestyle that Sarah had never really desired, but now found herself envying. This woman was everything Sarah wasn't. Younger, more glamorous, unencumbered by the responsibilities of suburban family life. But it was the most recent photo that made Sarah's blood run cold. Elena at a restaurant, laughing at something someone off camera had said, and there, barely visible in the reflection of the window behind her, was a figure that looked unmistakably like Michael. The timestamp showed it was from last weekend, when Michael had told Sarah he was attending a work conference in the city. The conference that had apparently included intimate dinners with women who were worth more than his wife's life. Sarah screenshot the image and stared at it until her eyes burned. 22 years of marriage, and she had become so invisible to her husband that he was comfortable taking his mistress to public restaurants, confident that his two worlds would never collide. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was calculated, methodical, and apparently worth $1.7 million. That evening, Michael came home at his usual time, briefcase in one hand, takeout dinner in the other, playing the role of the devoted husband with an expertise that now made Sarah's skin crawl. He kissed her cheek, the same perfunctory gesture he'd been making for months, and asked about her day while loosening his tie. Sarah watched him perform this routine, wondering how long he had been living this double life, how many lies he had told, how many times he had looked her in the eye and promised her things he never intended to keep. She said nothing about the insurance policy that night, choosing instead to observe him with the sharp attention of someone who had just realized she was married to a stranger. Every gesture seemed calculated now. Every smile felt rehearsed. When he excused himself to take a phone call in his study, claiming it was a client with an emergency, Sarah found herself straining to hear fragments of conversation through the closed door. The tone was too soft, too intimate for business, and when she heard him laugh, a genuine, warm laugh she hadn't heard directed at her in months, she felt something inside her chest break apart completely. The next morning brought another revelation that hit Sarah like a physical blow. While Michael showered, his phone buzzed with a text message that lit up the screen. The preview showed enough to confirm her worst fears. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. I love you more than words can say." E. The casual endearment, the declaration of love, the obvious expectation of another secret meeting. It all confirmed that this wasn't just an affair. This was a relationship, complete with emotions and promises and apparently life insurance policies that proved just how serious Michael was about his future with Elena. Sarah took a photo of the message with her own phone, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the device. Evidence, she told herself. She would need evidence for what was coming next, because there was no way she was going to let Michael continue this charade while planning to leave her financially destroyed and emotionally devastated. If he wanted to choose Elena over their family, he was going to face the consequences of that choice. But as she stood in their bedroom, listening to the shower run and looking at the photo of the text message on her phone, Sarah realized that her husband hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been planning for a future that didn't include her survival. The insurance policy wasn't just about taking care of Elena after he was gone. It was about making sure that even in death, Michael's priorities were clear, and his wife of 22 years wasn't among them. The woman who had always prided herself on being reasonable, on handling problems with calm discussion and rational solutions, felt something darker taking root in her heart. Michael had made his choice, and now it was time for Sarah to make hers. But first, she needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went, and whether the man she had loved for more than half her adult life had any intention of ending this double life voluntarily. What she was about to discover would prove that some secrets are worth killing for, and some betrayals demand a price that can only be paid in blood. Only be paid in blood. The investigation that Sarah was about to undertake would reveal layers of deception so intricate that she would question everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the man who had shared her bed for over 2 decades. Sarah's first stop was Michael's office building downtown, a glass tower where she had attended countless holiday parties and retirement celebrations over the years. The security guard recognized her immediately, greeting her with the warm familiarity reserved for the spouses of long-term employees. She smiled and waved, playing the role of the devoted wife bringing her husband lunch, while inside she felt like a spy infiltrating enemy territory. Michael's assistant, Janet, looked genuinely surprised to see her. "Oh, Sarah, Michael didn't mention you were coming by. He's actually in meetings all afternoon." The lie came so naturally to Janet that Sarah wondered how many times she had been complicit in covering for Michael's absences. How many late nights and weekend conferences had been fabricated stories, carefully constructed alibis that allowed Michael to live his double life without interruption. "That's okay," Sarah replied, keeping her voice light and casual. "I was just in the neighborhood. Maybe I'll surprise him later." As she spoke, she scanned Michael's desk through the glass partition of his office, looking for any evidence of the life he was hiding. Everything appeared meticulously normal. Family photos, work documents, the same leather briefcase he carried home every night. The performance was flawless, which somehow made the betrayal even more devastating. Walking back to her car, Sarah noticed a woman approaching the building's entrance. Tall, elegant, with dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, she moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in this world of expensive suits and power lunches. Something about her seemed familiar, and then Sarah's stomach dropped as recognition hit her like a physical blow. Elena Vasquez, even more stunning in person than in her carefully curated social media photos, was walking into Michael's building at 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. Sarah ducked behind a parked car, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched Elena stride through the lobby with the ease of someone who had made this journey many times before. The security guard barely glanced at her. She was obviously a familiar face, someone who had earned the right to access the building without question. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat as she realized that while she had been playing the surprised visitor, Elena was practically a resident. 20 minutes later, Sarah was still crouched behind the car when she saw them emerge together. Michael and Elena walking side by side through the lobby, their body language speaking a language of intimacy that made Sarah's chest burn with rage. They didn't touch. Too professional, too careful for such a public space. But the way Elena tilted her head when Michael spoke, the way his eyes lingered on her face, the invisible thread of connection that seemed to pull them toward each other, told a story that no amount of discretion could hide. They separated at the street corner, Elena heading toward the subway while Michael walked in the opposite direction toward the parking garage. Sarah waited until both figures had disappeared before emerging from her hiding spot, her legs shaky and her breathing uneven. The casual nature of their meeting, the comfortable routine they had obviously established, made it clear that this wasn't a recent development. This relationship had roots, history, a foundation that had been built while Sarah was grading papers and planning family dinners, and believing in a marriage that had apparently ended long before she realized it was over. That night, Sarah lay in bed beside Michael, listening to his steady breathing and wondering if he dreamed about Elena. When his phone buzzed with a late-night message, she felt him shift slightly, reaching for the device with the automatic response of someone who never missed a communication from his other life. The blue glow illuminated his face for just a moment before he turned away, but Sarah caught the expression that crossed his features. Soft, content, completely different from the polite distance he showed her. "Work emergency?" she whispered into the darkness, testing to see how easily the lies would come. "Yeah," he murmured, already settling back into sleep. "Client in Hong Kong. Time zones, you know." The fabrication was so smooth, so practiced, that Sarah realized this had become second nature to him. Lying to her was as automatic as breathing, as natural as the wedding ring he still wore, but apparently no longer honored. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Emma, calling from college, her voice bright with excitement about an internship opportunity that had opened up in the city. "Mom, it's with a marketing firm downtown, and I know it's last minute, but they want to interview me tomorrow. Can you believe it? It could be perfect for my resume." Sarah's blood turned to ice as Emma continued chattering about the opportunity, mentioning the company name with innocent enthusiasm. Vasquez and Associates, Elena's firm. The coincidence was too perfect, too convenient to be anything other than orchestrated. Michael wasn't just having an affair, he was systematically integrating Elena into their family's future, creating connections and opportunities that would bind their lives together in ways that went far beyond romantic entanglement. "Emma, honey," Sarah interrupted, her voice carefully controlled. "What exactly did Dad tell you about this internship?" The pause on the other end of the line was telling. "Well, he said he had heard about it through work connections, that it would be a great opportunity for someone with my major." "Why? Is something wrong?" Everything was wrong. Michael was using their daughter as another thread in the web he was weaving, another way to ensure that Elena became a permanent fixture in their lives. The internship wasn't about Emma's career. It was about Michael's future, about creating legitimate reasons for Elena to be involved with his family, about slowly transitioning from his double life to a new life where Elena took center stage. "No, sweetie," Sarah said, forcing brightness into her voice. "It sounds wonderful. I'm sure you'll do great in the interview." But even as she said the words, she was planning. If Michael thought he could manipulate their daughter into this sick game, he was about to discover that his wife was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. She called Elena's office, using a fake name and claiming to be interested in marketing services for her fictional small business. The receptionist was happy to schedule a consultation, and suddenly Sarah found herself with a face-to-face meeting with the woman who was worth more to her husband than she was. Elena's office was everything Sarah had expected. Sleek, modern, filled with the kind of artistic touches that spoke of good taste and disposable income. Elena herself was even more intimidating in person, possessed of the kind of natural elegance that made Sarah suddenly conscious of her sensible shoes and department store blouse. But as they sat across from each other, Sarah studying the woman who had stolen her husband's heart and financial future, she realized something crucial. Elena had no idea who she was. The conversation that followed was surreal, with Elena enthusiastically discussing marketing strategies while Sarah nodded and asked questions, all the while searching for any sign that Elena knew she was sitting across from the wife of her lover. There was nothing. No guilt, no recognition, no awareness that she was speaking to the woman whose life she was systematically destroying. "You seem familiar," Elena said at one point, tilting her head in a gesture Sarah had seen her make with Michael. "Have we met before?" "I don't think so," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "I have one of those faces, I guess. People are always thinking they know me from somewhere." Elena laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made Sarah's hatred burn even brighter. This woman was living her best life, enjoying a passionate affair with a married man, positioned to inherit a fortune upon his death, and she had the audacity to be charming and likable. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. As the meeting concluded, Elena walked Sarah to the door, still discussing potential marketing campaigns with professional enthusiasm. "I really think we could do something special for your business," she said, handing Sarah her business card with a smile that was probably meant to be encouraging, but felt like a slap across the face. "I'm sure we could," Sarah replied, slipping the card into her purse next to the printed copy of the insurance policy. "I'll be in touch very soon." Walking back to her car, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. The hurt and confusion of the past few days was crystallizing into something harder, more focused. Michael and Elena thought they were so clever, so careful in their deception, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the woman they were betraying. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with Elena's business card, the insurance policy, and printed screenshots of Elena's social media posts spread out before her like evidence in a criminal case. Because that's what this was, really. A crime against their marriage, against their family, against everything Sarah had believed about her life and future. Michael came home late, claiming another client emergency. His lies now so transparent that Sarah wondered how she had ever believed them. As he microwaved leftover dinner and made small talk about his day, Sarah watched him with the cold assessment of someone planning a war. "How was your day?" he asked. The same question he had asked thousands of times before, but now it carried a different weight. "Enlightening," Sarah replied, and something in her tone made him look up sharply. For just a moment, their eyes met across the kitchen table, and Sarah saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his features. Did he suspect that she knew? Was he finally beginning to understand that his careful deception was unraveling? "Everything okay?" he asked, and there was a note of genuine concern in his voice that almost made her laugh. "Everything's perfect," she said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Absolutely perfect. But perfect was the last thing their situation was about to become, because Sarah Martinez was done being the victim in her own life story, and she was about to prove that a woman scorned was indeed the most dangerous enemy of all. Of all. The next morning, Sarah implemented a plan that would have impressed the most seasoned private investigator. She called in sick to work, something she had done maybe 5 times in her entire teaching career, and positioned herself at a coffee shop across from Elena's office building. The barista looked at her strangely when she ordered her 4th latte in 2 hours, but Sarah barely noticed. Her attention was laser-focused on the entrance, waiting for patterns to emerge from the chaos of her crumbling marriage. At 11:30, Michael's car pulled up to the curb. Sarah's heart hammered as she watched him emerge, straightening his tie with the same gesture she had seen him make before important client meetings. But this wasn't business. This was personal, intimate, and happening in broad daylight, while his wife sat 50 yards away documenting every moment. Elena appeared in the lobby within minutes, moving toward Michael with a familiarity that spoke of countless similar meetings. They didn't embrace, too risky in such a public space, but the way they looked at each other made Sarah's chest tighten with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. This wasn't just physical attraction or midlife crisis desperation. The connection between them was real, deep, and completely devastating to everything Sarah had built her life around. They walked together toward an upscale restaurant 3 blocks away, their conversation animated and comfortable. Sarah followed at a distance, her hands shaking as she snapped photos with her phone. 22 years of marriage, and she had never seen Michael look at her the way he was looking at Elena right now, like she was the most fascinating person in the world, like every word she spoke was worth treasuring. Inside the restaurant, Sarah managed to secure a table with a partial view of their booth. The hostess seated them in what was obviously their regular spot, judging by how Elena slid into the banquette without hesitation, and Michael ordered wine without consulting the menu. This was routine for them, an established ritual that had been playing out while Sarah graded spelling tests and worried about mortgage payments and planned family vacations that Michael probably resented attending. The conversation she could overhear in fragments was even more damaging than she had feared. Elena was talking about apartment hunting, mentioning neighborhoods that were far too expensive for someone in her position unless she had financial backing. Michael's responses were encouraging, supportive, peppered with endearments that he used to reserve for Sarah back when their marriage had been real instead of performative. "The place on 5th Street has incredible natural light," Elena was saying, her voice carrying easily across the restaurant's ambient noise, perfect for the home office we talked about. "Whatever makes you happy," Michael replied, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "Money isn't an object, you know that." Sarah gripped her water glass so tightly she was surprised it didn't shatter. Money wasn't an object for Elena, but Sarah had been clipping coupons for groceries and driving a 10-year-old car because Michael claimed they needed to be more careful with their spending. Every financial sacrifice Sarah had made, every luxury she had foregone for the sake of their family's future, had been funding this elaborate deception. The lunch stretched on for 2 hours, and Sarah found herself studying Elena with the intensity of someone trying to understand a foreign language. She was undeniably beautiful, but it was more than that. Elena had an energy about her, a vibrancy that made everyone in the restaurant glance her way. She laughed easily, gestured expressively, commanded attention without seeming to try. Sarah realized with growing horror that Elena wasn't just younger and more attractive. She was everything Sarah used to be before. Marriage and motherhood, and 20 years of routine had worn away her edges. When they finally prepared to leave, Michael pulled out an envelope that made Sarah's blood run cold. Even from across the restaurant, she could see the thickness of it, the careful way he slid it across the table to Elena. Not a credit card or cash for lunch, this was substantial, deliberate, the kind of financial support that spoke of long-term planning and serious commitment. Elena's face lit up as she peeked inside the envelope, and she mouthed, "Thank you," with such genuine gratitude that Sarah felt physically sick. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a complete financial partnership, with Michael systematically transferring resources from his legal family to his chosen family. As they stood to leave, Michael's phone rang. Sarah watched his expression change as he glanced at the caller ID, his face shifting into the mask of polite distance she knew so well. "It's Sarah," she heard him say to Elena, and the casual way he dismissed his wife's call, the woman who had built a life with him, who had given him a daughter, who had stood by him through every challenge, made something inside Sarah's chest turn to ice. Elena nodded understandingly, squeezing Michael's arm in a gesture of support that was somehow more intimate than any kiss could have been. She understood that Sarah was an inconvenience, an obligation that had to be managed while they pursued their real relationship. The depth of their conspiracy was breathtaking in its casual cruelty. Sarah left the restaurant before they did, her mind racing with the implications of what she had witnessed. This wasn't just infidelity, this was systematic replacement. Michael was gradually transitioning Elena into the role Sarah had occupied, financially supporting her, emotionally investing in her future, creating a parallel life that would eventually become his only life. The insurance policy wasn't just about providing for Elena after his death. It was about ensuring that even if something happened to him, she would be able to maintain the lifestyle he was creating for her. That evening, Sarah sat in her car outside Elena's apartment building, a converted warehouse in the arts district that screamed expensive bohemian chic. Through the large windows on the 3rd floor, she could see Elena moving around what was obviously a beautifully appointed space, far beyond what a marketing coordinator's salary could afford. Michael's financial support was evident in every detail: the hardwood floors, the designer furniture, the original artwork that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly teaching salary. At 8:30, Michael's car pulled up to the building. Sarah slumped down in her seat, watching as he emerged with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers that looked like they came from the expensive florist downtown. He had a key to Elena's building, she realized, observing how smoothly he entered without buzzing up. This wasn't a casual affair. This was a domestic partnership, complete with shared access and established routines. Through the apartment windows, Sarah could see them embrace, could witness the kind of passionate reunion that she and Michael hadn't shared in years. They moved around the kitchen together, preparing dinner with an ease that spoke of countless similar evenings. Elena poured wine, while Michael unpacked what appeared to be groceries from an upscale market, and Sarah realized that he was essentially living two complete lives, one with his legal wife, and one with the woman he actually wanted to be with. The intimate dinner that followed was torture to witness. Sarah couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see their body language, the way they leaned toward each other, the frequent touches and shared laughter. This was what marriage was supposed to look like, what her own marriage had looked like 20 years ago before routine and responsibility had worn away the passion. When they moved to the couch after dinner, Sarah knew she should leave. What she was witnessing was private, intimate. None of her business, despite the fact that her husband was one of the participants. But she couldn't tear herself away from this window into Michael's real life, couldn't stop watching the man she thought she knew be genuinely happy in a way she hadn't seen in years. It was nearly midnight when Michael finally emerged from the building, and Sarah realized he would be coming home to her soon, would slip into their bed and pretend to be the devoted husband while still carrying the scent of another woman's perfume. The thought made her stomach churn with a combination of revulsion and rage that was becoming harder to contain. The next few days blurred together in a haze of surveillance and discovery. Sarah found herself living a double life almost as elaborate as Michael's, telling lies about where she was going and what she was doing while she systematically documented the scope of his betrayal. She followed him to expensive restaurants where he wined and dined Elena, to jewelry stores where he bought her gifts that probably cost more than Sarah's engagement ring, to real estate offices where they looked at apartments that would serve as love nests funded by money that should have been securing his family's future. Each revelation was worse than the last. Elena wasn't just Michael's mistress. She was his business partner, his confidant, his chosen family. He had created a completely separate identity with her, one where he was generous and passionate and emotionally available in ways he hadn't been with Sarah in years. The man Elena knew was the man Sarah had fallen in love with decades ago, before marriage had turned him into a distant stranger who went through the motions of domestic life, while his heart clearly belonged elsewhere. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon when Sarah intercepted a text message thread that made her blood run cold. Elena was discussing wedding venues with Michael, sending him photos of locations and talking about guest lists and catering options. Not hypothetical future planning. Concrete, immediate arrangements for a ceremony that was apparently scheduled for the following month. "The vineyard in Napa looks perfect," Elena had written, followed by a string of heart emojis. "I can't wait to be your wife, officially and completely." Michael's response was immediate and devastating. "I've already filed the divorce papers. Sarah will be served tomorrow. By Christmas, you'll be Mrs. Michael Martinez, and we can finally stop hiding." Sarah stared at the messages until the words blurred together, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Divorce papers. Filed without her knowledge, without any conversation or attempt at reconciliation. Michael had made the decision to end their marriage unilaterally, and she was going to find out about it when a process server appeared at her door like some kind of legal ambush. The wedding planning continued in subsequent messages, with Elena discussing flowers and musicians and photographers with the enthusiasm of a woman who had never been married before, and didn't care that her future husband was destroying another woman's life to make room for their happiness. There was no guilt in their conversation, no acknowledgement that their joy was built on Sarah's devastation. But it was the final message in the thread that pushed Sarah over the edge into something darker than heartbreak or rage. Elena had sent Michael a photo of a wedding dress. Elegant, expensive. Exactly the kind of gown Sarah had dreamed of wearing to renew their vows for their 25th anniversary. "What do you think, baby? Too much for a second wedding?" Michael's response made Sarah's vision blur with fury. "Nothing is too much for you. You deserve everything beautiful in the world. I should have married you first." That night, Sarah lay in bed next to Michael, listening to him breathe and planning his destruction. He thought he was so clever, so careful in his deception, but he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the woman he was betraying, had assumed that 22 years of marriage had made her predictable and passive. He was about to discover that a woman with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous enemy he could have created. The divorce papers arrived the next morning, delivered by a nervous young man who clearly hated his job. Sarah signed for them with a calm that surprised even her, thanked the process server politely, and closed the door before allowing her mask to slip. The papers were thorough, clearly prepared by expensive lawyers, and designed to leave Sarah with as little as possible while protecting Michael's assets for his new life with Elena. But Michael had made another mistake in his careful planning. He had forgotten that Sarah knew where all the financial bodies were buried, had access to account information and investment records that could paint a very different picture of their marital assets. 22 years of handling the family finances had given her knowledge that his lawyers apparently didn't realize she possessed. That afternoon, Sarah made a phone call that would change everything. Not to a divorce attorney or a private investigator, but to Michael's largest client, a conservative family foundation that prided itself on moral values and ethical leadership. The conversation that followed was brief, professional, and absolutely devastating to Michael's career prospects. "I thought you should know," Sarah said calmly to the foundation's director, "that Michael Martinez, who handles your account, has been systematically embezzling funds to support an extramarital affair. I have documentation of every transaction, every misappropriated dollar, every lie he told to cover his tracks." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, followed by a very quiet request for Sarah to forward all relevant documentation immediately. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, Michael's phone was ringing with calls from panicked clients who had heard rumors about financial irregularities in his handling of their accounts. Sarah felt no satisfaction in watching Michael's professional world crumble, only a cold sense of justice being served. He had chosen to destroy their family for his own selfish desires, and now he would face the consequences of that choice. Elena's expensive lifestyle was about to become much more difficult to maintain when Michael's income disappeared along with his reputation. But Sarah wasn't finished. If Michael thought he could simply discard her like an outdated piece of furniture while securing his future with Elena, he was about to learn that some betrayals came with a price that couldn't be calculated in dollars and cents. The war had begun, and Sarah Martinez was playing to win everything. The call came at 3 in the morning, jarring Sarah from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. Michael's phone buzzed incessantly on his nightstand, the screen lighting up their bedroom like a strobe light. Sarah watched her husband fumble for the device, his face pale in the blue glow as he read the caller ID. "Elena," he whispered, glancing at Sarah before slipping out of bed. "I have to take this." Sarah lay perfectly still, listening to his hushed conversation in the hallway. The words were muffled, but the tone was unmistakable: panic, fear, desperation. When he returned 20 minutes later, his hands were shaking. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Work crisis," he mumbled, but she could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. "I might have to go in early tomorrow." Sarah nodded, feigning sleep as Michael tossed restlessly beside her. But she was wide awake now, her mind racing with possibilities. Something had rattled Elena badly enough to call in the middle of the night. and whatever it was had Michael terrified. The next morning brought answers in the form of a news report that made Sarah's coffee cup freeze halfway to her lips. The anchor's voice was crisp and professional as she delivered the story. Local businessman James Vasquez was found dead in his downtown apartment last night, the apparent victim of a violent robbery. Police are investigating the connection between Vasquez's death and recent threats he had received regarding his estranged daughter's relationship with a married man. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the pieces clicked into place. James Vasquez, Elena's father, the man who had recently discovered his daughter's affair and threatened to expose Michael publicly unless he ended the relationship immediately. The man who had been demanding financial compensation for his daughter's damaged reputation and had scheduled a meeting with Michael's employers for this very morning. Michael emerged from the bathroom, his face ashen as he stared at his phone. The news alert was probably spreading through his contacts, through Elena's circle, through everyone who knew about their secret relationship. The timing was too convenient, too perfect to be coincidental. "Did you hear about that businessman who was killed?" Sarah asked casually, watching Michael's reaction carefully. His face went completely white. "What businessman?" "James Vasquez," Sarah said quietly, watching the color drain completely from Michael's face. "Elena's father, the one who was threatening to expose your affair." Michael's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. For a moment, the only sound in their kitchen was the steady drip of the coffee maker and the distant hum of morning traffic. "I don't know what you're talking about," he whispered, but his voice cracked on the words. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope, placing it gently on the kitchen table between them. "The police will be very interested in these financial records, Michael, especially the $50,000 withdrawal you made last Tuesday. The same day, James Vasquez called your office and demanded that exact amount to keep quiet about your relationship with his daughter." Michael's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. 22 years of marriage, and Sarah had never seen him look so broken, so utterly defeated. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he breathed. "I just went to talk to him, to reason with him. He was going to destroy everything, my career, Elena's reputation, our future together. When he started laughing at me, telling me I was pathetic for throwing away my family for a woman who would never truly love me," Michael's voice trailed off into silence. "So you killed him," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was self-defense," Michael said desperately, looking up at her with tears streaming down his face. "He came at me with a knife, Sarah. I had to protect myself." But Sarah was already shaking her head, pulling out another piece of paper from the envelope. "The coroner's preliminary report says he was struck from behind, Michael, multiple times. That's not self-defense, that's murder." The kitchen fell silent except for Michael's ragged breathing. Sarah watched her husband of 22 years completely fall apart and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. He had destroyed their family, manipulated their daughter, stolen their future, and ultimately committed murder to protect his selfish desires. "Elena doesn't know," Michael said finally, his voice hollow. "She thinks her father died in a robbery. Please, Sarah, I'll do anything. Give you everything. Sign whatever papers you want. Just don't destroy her life, too." Sarah stood up slowly, smoothing down her skirt with deliberate precision. "You're right about one thing, Michael. Elena doesn't know, but she's about to learn the truth about the man she was planning to marry." She pulled out her phone, and Michael's eyes widened in horror as he saw Elena's number on the screen. "Sarah, please." "Hello, Elena," Sarah said as the call connected, her voice warm and friendly. "This is Sarah Martinez, Michael's wife." I think it's time we had a conversation about your father's death, don't you? Michael has something very important he needs to tell you. As she handed the phone to Michael, Sarah felt the weight of 22 years of betrayal finally lifting from her shoulders. The insurance policy, the secret affair, the manipulation of their daughter, none of it mattered now. Michael had destroyed himself more thoroughly than she ever could have managed. Justice, Sarah realized, sometimes came in the most unexpected forms. And sometimes the greatest revenge was simply allowing the